Let me ask you something. When did you first notice it? That feeling, quiet at first, almost like a shadow at the edge of your vision. The feeling that time was moving too quickly, that the years were no longer arriving slowly the way they once did when you were young. That somehow, without any announcement, without any warning, whole seasons of your life had passed while you were not quite looking. Perhaps you felt it at a birthday, or standing in a room full of photographs. Or one evening very late when the house was quiet and the light was low, and you sat still for a moment and thought to yourself, where did it all go? This feeling is not unusual. It visits nearly everyone sooner or later. And when it comes, most people assume the same thing. They assume that life is simply short, that time is cruel, that the years were always going to vanish this quickly. But I want to sit with you for a little while this evening, and I want to offer you a different thought, a thought I have carried with me through many years and many sorrows of my own. Life is not short. Life is, in truth, remarkably long. You have been given more hours than you can easily count, more days than any generation before yours had reason to expect, more seasons of ordinary life, of morning light and evening meals and the sound of familiar voices, than most human beings in history were ever granted. No, life is not short. What is short is the time we actually spend living it. That is the difference. And it is a difference that matters enormously. Think about the years you have lived, not just the years that passed, but the ones you actually inhabited, the mornings you were fully present for, the conversations where you were truly there, listening, not half somewhere else in your mind. The evenings you sat quietly and felt the fullness of a day well spent. The moments where time itself seemed to pause and offer you something real. How many of those were there? And then think about the rest. The years spent rushing, the decades spent preparing for something that never quite arrived. The hours poured into worries that dissolved on their own. The long stretches of life spent simply managing, paying bills, fulfilling obligations, keeping up appearances, while something deeper inside waited patiently for its turn. Most of us, if we are honest with ourselves, can feel the difference between those two kinds of time. One kind leaves something behind, a warmth, a memory, a quiet sense of having been alive. The other kind vanishes without a trace. And it is this second kind, this invisible, untraceable time, that makes life feel short. Not because life gave us too little, but because we did not know how to hold what we were given. I have spent a great deal of my own life thinking about this, and I will confess to you that I did not always live as wisely as I wrote. There were years I gave away to ambition, years I spent performing the role of an important man rather than being a present one, years I was too busy to notice what was quietly disappearing around me. I understand what it means to reach a point in life and feel the cold clarity of looking back. And so when I speak to you now, it is not from some elevated place of perfect wisdom. It is from the same place you are in. A human place, a place of having seen time pass and having asked, perhaps too late, whether it was spent well. That question, whether time was spent well, is not a comfortable one. But it is the most important question a person can ask themselves while there is still time left to answer it differently. Let us begin then with the most common way that life is lost, not through tragedy, not through illness or accident or misfortune, but through distraction. This is the quiet thief that most people never catch, because it does not feel like stealing. It feels like living. It feels like being busy. It feels like keeping up, staying informed, managing the endless flow of obligations and entertainments and small urgencies that fill each day from morning until night. But there is a difference between being busy and being alive. Busyness is movement without direction. It is the feeling of always having something to do while somehow never arriving anywhere that matters. Whole years can pass inside busyness. Whole decades can be lived inside its constant hum. And at the end of those years, when you sit quietly and ask what was accomplished, what was truly felt, what was given to the people you love, you may find that the answer is thinner than you expected. Modern life is very skilled at creating busyness. It offers distractions of extraordinary sophistication, devices that fill every silence, screens that answer every idle moment. A constant stream of information and noise designed not to nourish the mind, but simply to occupy it, to keep it moving, to ensure that stillness, true, uncomfortable, necessary stillness, never quite arrives. Because stillness is where life asks its questions, and many people are afraid of those questions. It is easier to stay busy than to be quiet. It is easier to scroll and click and consume than to sit with your own thoughts and ask whether you are happy, whether you are at peace, whether the life you are living is the one you actually want. Distraction protects us from that confrontation, and in doing so, it slowly, gently, and almost kindly steals our years. There is another way life disappears, and it is perhaps even more painful to acknowledge. We lose enormous portions of life to worry, not to the things we worry about, not to the actual difficulties and hardships that visit every human life, but to the anticipation of them, to the long hours spent dreading what has not yet happened, to the weeks spent in quiet anxiety about possibilities that never arrived, to the years spent managing fears that were, in the end, larger in imagination than in reality. Think about what you have worried about in your life, how much of it came to pass, and of what came to pass. How much was made better by all that worrying? Did the anxious nights prepare you in any meaningful way? Did the hours of dread soften the difficulty when it finally arrived? Almost never. Worry is not preparation. It is not caution or wisdom or foresight dressed in useful clothing. Worry is simply suffering chosen in advance. It is paying the cost of a difficulty twice, once before it happens, in fear, and once when it actually arrives. And many people pay that cost, not twice, but dozens of times. They worry about the same things for years. About money they may or may not lose. About health they may or may not lose. About relationships they may or may not lose. And while they are busy paying this endless, anticipatory cost, life continues moving past them. The ordinary days, which are in fact the whole substance of a life, keep arriving and departing, largely unnoticed, because the mind is elsewhere, rehearsing catastrophes that may never come. I am not suggesting that difficulties do not exist. They do. Life is not without its genuine hardships and sorrows. But there is a difference between meeting a difficulty when it arrives and spending your life in its waiting room. The first is courage. The second is a quiet form of self-abandonment. And if you look back at your years, you may find that worry consumed more of them than any actual hardship ever did. There is a particular kind of loss that I find most quietly devastating. And it is this: living for the opinions of others. So many people spend the best years of their lives building an image, constructing a version of themselves that will be approved of, admired, envied, perhaps. They choose careers not from genuine desire, but from the expectation of how those careers will appear. They accumulate possessions, not because those possessions bring joy, but because they signal something to the people watching. They avoid the things they truly want to do because those things might not look impressive enough. They spend decades managing a reputation rather than inhabiting a life. And then one day, perhaps after a long illness, or after losing someone they loved, or simply after a very quiet evening alone, they suddenly see clearly. They see that the audience they were performing for was never paying as much attention as they assumed. They see that the approval they were chasing never quite arrived, or arrived and immediately needed to be chased again. They see that the life they sacrificed to appearances was the only life they had. This realization, when it comes, can feel like grief. And in a way, it is grief. It is mourning for years given to the wrong purposes. For mourning spent worrying about how things looked rather than how they felt. For conversations avoided because vulnerability seemed undignified. For laughter suppressed and joy rationed and pleasure postponed because the performance required it. I want to ask you gently and without judgment, how much of your life was lived for others to see? Not all of it, perhaps, maybe not even most of it, but some portion, a portion that, if you are honest, you wish had been given to something more real, more yours, more true to the quiet self that lived beneath the performance. That wish is not weakness. That wish is wisdom arriving, perhaps a little late, but arriving nonetheless. Now let us talk about time itself, because there is something very strange about the way human beings treat it. Consider how carefully most people protect their money. They lock it away, they track it, they think carefully before spending it. They grow uncomfortable when it is wasted. They plan for its future and feel anxious when its future is uncertain. But time, which is the only truly irreplaceable thing a human being possesses, is treated with almost no such care. People give their time away without hesitation, to obligations that do not matter, to relationships that drain rather than nourish, to entertainments that leave nothing behind, to resentments that cost years of quiet suffering without producing any result except more suffering. Money, when lost, can sometimes be recovered. Time, when lost, is gone as completely as if it never existed. And yet we guard our wallets and leave our hours unguarded. Why is this? I think it is because money announces its absence. When it is gone, there is a number somewhere that makes this fact undeniable. But time disappears quietly. There is no number, no account, no statement at the end of the year showing you exactly how many hours were spent on what. There is only the faint unease, if you allow yourself to feel it, that something valuable has been passing through your hands and you have not been paying attention. The richest person in any room is not the one with the most money. It is the one who has learned to spend time as carefully as most people spend money, slowly, intentionally, on things that are worth it. That person is rare, but that person exists. And that person, at the end of their days, does not feel that life was short. They feel that it was full. I want to speak for a moment about the people in your life, the ones who were there or are still there, the ones whose voices you know and whose faces you can picture without effort. Because this, I think, is where the deepest regrets tend to live. Not in the careers not taken, not in the money not made, not in the adventures not attempted, but in the conversations not had, the afternoons not shared, the simple presence not given to the people who wanted it. It is a remarkable thing about human nature that we often treat strangers with more ceremony than we treat the people we love. We give our best attention to meetings and appointments and professional obligations, and we give our leftover attention, tired, distracted, half-present, to the people who matter most. We assume, without quite saying it, that our loved ones will always be there for the real attention, the full presence, the unhurried afternoon that is always being planned for some later date that never quite arrives. We tell ourselves we will have that long conversation with our mother when things slow down. We tell ourselves we will spend that easy, unscheduled time with our children when the project is finished. We tell ourselves we will tell our friends what they mean to us sometime when it doesn't feel awkward. And then, time does what time always does. It continues. And one morning you wake up and the opportunity is no longer there. Not because anything dramatic happened, necessarily. Sometimes simply because people age, drift, change, move away. Or because you aged and looked up from your busyness and found that the ordinary afternoon you always meant to give never happened. I want you to sit with that for a moment, not to cause you pain, but because there may still be time. There may be someone in your life right now who is waiting, quietly and without complaint, for your full attention. someone who would value an hour of your genuine presence more than any gift you could offer them. That hour exists, if you choose to give it. Let us speak now about something that perhaps feels familiar. The long, patient habit of waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for circumstances to improve. Waiting for the children to grow up, for the mortgage to be paid, for retirement to arrive, for some future season of life when things will finally be calm enough to begin the things that matter. This waiting is one of the great quiet tragedies of human life, because the right time is always arriving and always being deferred. There is always one more obligation to fulfill before life can properly begin. One more threshold to cross before the real living starts. And the years accumulate inside this waiting without anyone choosing them to. You know this feeling, perhaps. The feeling of being almost there. Almost at the point where you can breathe freely. Almost at the point where there will be time for the things you have been meaning to do, the places you have been meaning to see, the person you have been meaning to become. Almost. Almost. Always. Almost. But almost never arrives. What arrives is more almost. And then one day, looking back, you see that your whole life was spent in the anteroom of your real life, waiting for a door to open that was in fact already open. That was open all along. This is perhaps the most painful of all the ways we lose our years, because it is so reasonable, so responsible seeming, so patient and careful and mature. Nobody sets out to waste their life by waiting. They set out to be prudent, to be patient, to prepare properly. But prudence without awareness becomes paralysis. And patience without intention becomes postponement. And preparation, when it becomes permanent, is simply another name for avoidance. The time was not waiting for your circumstances to improve. The time was passing. There is something I want to say now that I hope you will hear gently, as it is meant. Most people survive their lives rather than live them. This is not a judgment. It is an observation, and a compassionate one. Because surviving is hard. Maintaining a life, keeping it running, keeping it stable, keeping the people within it safe and fed and cared for, requires real effort and real sacrifice. I do not diminish that. But there is a difference between the life that is maintained and the life that is fully inhabited. A life can be maintained quite efficiently while being barely felt, while passing like a long, competent performance in which all the right things are done and none of the deepest things are touched. Where the years go by in a series of managed obligations and careful routines, and the self at the center of it all waits quietly, year after year, to be invited in. That self, the one that waits, is not asking for very much. It does not demand adventure or greatness or extraordinary experience. It asks for presence. For a few hours each week, when you are not managing or performing or worrying, but simply being. Simply here. Simply alive to what is around you. The color of afternoon light. The sound of a particular voice. The feeling of doing something you love without needing it to be useful or impressive. The warmth of a small kindness given or received. The satisfaction of a meal eaten slowly, in good company, without hurry. These things are available. They are available right now. They do not require wealth or health or perfect circumstances. They require only attention. But attention is exactly what the modern world works hardest to take from you. I want to speak for a moment about how regret grows. It does not arrive all at once. It does not announce itself with a clear beginning or a defined moment of arrival. It grows the way a shadow grows in the late afternoon, slowly, almost imperceptibly, and then suddenly, when you are not quite expecting it, it is very long. Regret grows from small things mostly. Not usually from the great dramatic failures of a life, though those exist, but from the accumulation of small surrenders. The moment you chose not to speak honestly because it seemed easier. The afternoon you gave to something forgettable instead of something meaningful. The year you spent being angry at someone over a matter that, seen from any distance, was not worth the year. These small surrenders, taken one by one, seem entirely manageable, even reasonable. We make them for what feel like perfectly good reasons. We are tired. We are busy. The timing is wrong. The risk seems too high. The reward seems too uncertain. But they accumulate. And over decades, their accumulation produces something heavy. The particular sadness of looking back and seeing not the life you chose, but the life you allowed to happen to you. The life assembled by default rather than by decision. The life shaped more by what you avoided than by what you pursued. I'm not saying every life should be dramatic or ambitious or full of bold choices. Some of the finest lives ever lived were very quiet, very simple, very small in the world's estimation. But they were chosen. They were felt. They were lived with some degree of awareness and intention. And that awareness, even in a very quiet life, is the difference between a life that feels full and a life that feels, in the end, as though it somehow passed you by. Now I want to shift towards something else. Because I did not come here to leave you only with sorrow. The realization that time has been wasted is painful, but it is also, if you allow it to be, the beginning of something different. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes only to those who have lived long enough to see clearly, who have carried enough years to know, from direct experience rather than theory, what actually matters and what does not, who have outlived enough anxieties and ambitions and performances to finally stop being distracted by them. This freedom is not available to the young. The young are still constructing their sense of what life requires from them. They are still listening to all the voices telling them what to want and what to fear and what to prove. They are still in many ways performing for an audience they are only beginning to understand does not exist in the way they imagined. But you, if you have lived enough years, may have arrived at a place where that performance has lost some of its urgency, where the need to impress has softened, where the fear of other people's opinions has grown quieter, where you know, from having lived, which of your worries were real and which were merely shadows. That knowing is not nothing. That knowing is, in fact, one of the most valuable things a human being can possess. The question is only whether you use it. What does it mean to use it? It means very simple things, smaller things than you might expect. It means spending less of your remaining time on things that do not genuinely matter to you and more on things that do. It means having the conversations you have been postponing, not all of them, not immediately, but beginning, starting somewhere, saying one honest thing to one person who deserves to hear it. It means paying attention to the ordinary days, because the ordinary days are not the space between the important things. The ordinary days are the important things. They are where your life actually lives. In the Tuesday morning with good coffee, in the slow walk somewhere familiar, in the phone call with someone you love, in the quiet evening where nothing special happens and everything, somehow, is enough. It means letting go of some of what you are still carrying. The old resentments, the unfinished arguments with people who may no longer be here or may not remember them. The shame about things that cannot be changed. The regret about roads not taken that no amount of regret will now open. Not because letting go is easy, but because carrying these things costs time, costs presence, costs the very hours and days you could spend being somewhere other than the past. I want to say something about peace, because I think it is misunderstood. Most people think of peace as the absence of difficulty, as a condition that arrives when the problems are solved and the obligations are met and the worries have finally been put to rest. But that kind of peace never comes, because the problems are never all solved. The obligations never fully dissolve. The worries find new things to attach themselves to with remarkable efficiency. Real peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is a decision made in the presence of difficulty. It is the choice to be undisturbed by the things that cannot be controlled, to observe the noise of life without being entirely consumed by it, to know the difference between a problem that requires your urgent attention and a problem that simply requires your patience. This kind of peace is not passive. It is not resignation or indifference. It is an active daily practice of returning to what is actually happening, right here, right now, and choosing not to be pulled entirely away by the endless noise of what might happen, what should have happened, what other people think, and what the world seems to expect. It is a practice, and like all practices, it improves with time, which means that you, who have more time behind you than many, have also had more opportunity to practice than many. Even if you did not always know that was what you were doing. Even the difficult seasons, the ones where you were tested and sometimes found lacking, were also moments of practice, of learning, of quietly becoming more capable of the kind of presence that makes life feel like life. Let me speak to you now about the value of slowness, because this, I think, is something our age has forgotten almost entirely. There is a kind of wisdom that only comes through moving slowly, through allowing experience to land rather than rushing past it, through giving thoughts the time to fully form before reaching for the next distraction, through being willing to sit with a feeling, even an uncomfortable one, long enough to understand what it is telling you. Slow living is not lazy living. It is not unproductive or purposeless or lacking in ambition. It is simply living with enough space in it to actually be inhabited. Think of the meals you have eaten slowly, in good company, with nowhere else to be. Think of the books you have read, not to finish, but to feel. Think of the conversations that wandered without agenda and arrived somewhere unexpected and true. Think of the mornings you allowed yourself to wake gently, without immediately reaching for something urgent. Those moments, I suspect, are among the ones you remember most warmly, among the ones that feel, looking back, most like living. Not the rushed ones, not the productive ones, not the ones where you accomplished a great deal in a very short time, but the slow ones, the ones with space in them. There is still time for those. There is still time to eat more slowly, to listen more carefully, to walk more attentively, to look at the world with a little more of the wonder you perhaps had as a child and gradually trained yourself out of as the business of life demanded your attention. That wonder is not gone. It is simply waiting. As I come toward the end of what I want to share with you tonight, I want to ask you one last thing, not as a challenge, not as a judgment, but as a genuine question, asked with care. What would it mean for you to live well with the time you have left? Not perfectly, not heroically, not in any way that requires you to become a different person or to accomplish extraordinary things. Simply well, with some awareness of what you are doing and why, with some willingness to be present for the ordinary mornings, with some courage to say the things that still need saying and to let go of the things that no longer serve you, with some gentleness toward yourself for all the time that was not spent as wisely as it might have been because you were human, and being human is, in itself, a difficult and beautiful and uncertain undertaking. You are not too late. This is what I most want you to hear and to believe. The person who realizes at 60 or 70 or 80 that they have been spending their days carelessly, that person is not too late. They are, in fact, in the best possible position, because they have both the awareness and, if they choose to use it, the time. Not unlimited time. None of us have that. But time. Real, workable, precious time. Time to say something true, to notice something beautiful, to be somewhere fully, without the part of the mind that is always halfway somewhere else. To give a few more hours to the people who want them, to sit quietly and feel, without trying to fix or manage or optimize, the fact of being alive. Life is not short. I want to leave you with this, because I believe it with everything I have thought and observed and experienced. Life is not short. It is long and full and extraordinarily rich in its ordinary details. It is made of thousands upon thousands of mornings that each carried something worth noticing, of years that contained within them more beauty and connection and meaning than could ever be fully catalogued. What is short is our attention to it. What is short is our willingness to actually be here, in the day, in the hour, in the moment that is happening, rather than somewhere ahead or behind in time. What is short is our patience with slowness, and our tolerance for stillness, and our trust that the quiet, unspectacular present contains something worth inhabiting. We were taught, most of us, to spend our lives in pursuit, in motion, in preparation, in performance. We were taught that the future held the real living and that the present was merely the cost of getting there. But the future always becomes the present. And if we have not learned to live in the present, we will not suddenly live in it when we arrive at some imagined threshold. We will simply find ourselves in another present, looking ahead to another future, waiting for a fullness that keeps receding. The fullness is here. It was always here, in the ordinary afternoon, in the familiar face, in the unremarkable Tuesday that is, in fact, one of the limited number of Tuesdays remaining to you, and therefore more precious than you have perhaps allowed yourself to feel. Wisdom does not arrive all at once. It does not arrive at the moment of some great revelation or dramatic turning point. It arrives quietly, over time, in small recognitions, in moments where something you always sort of knew becomes something you finally feel. Maybe this evening is one of those moments. Maybe something said here has landed somewhere in you that will shift, slightly, quietly, the way you move through the coming days. That would be enough. That would be more than enough. Not transformation, not revolution, just a little more awareness, a little more willingness to be here, a little more tenderness toward the time you have and toward the life that is still, even now, asking to be lived. Go slowly. Notice what is around you. Say the true thing. Give the real hour to the person who deserves it, and understand as deeply as you are able that the ordinary day you are living right now is not a rehearsal for something more important. It is the thing itself. It always was.